A new lipedema treatment centre is in town, the Lymph and Muscle Centre in Belmont, Newcastle, New South Wales, a centre dedicated to providing thoughtful, client-centred care with a strong focus on supporting those living with lipedema and the unique challenges that come with it. A truly holistic approach to well-being for those that have too often been dismissed or misunderstood.
Services include lymphatic drainage, congestive therapy, compression pump therapy, and much more in the lymphatic health, also coupled with muscle therapies, myotherapy, dry needling, cupping, and massage. For our integrated health services, bone therapy for the nervous system, nutrition exploring environmental and cellular health, food intolerances, metabolic dysfunction, coaching, and easy to follow and create meal plans.
Looking ahead, there are plans to expand into mental and emotional well-being support with counselling or psychology. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to the Lipoedema Podcast. We are your hosts, Shell.
And Tiana, and today we are back with lipedema warrior Caroline Antonino to talk about her experience with the carnivore diet. Now, if you have not listened to episode 124 yet with Caroline, please go back and have a listen to that. But for now, hi Caroline, welcome back.
Hi, thank you.
All right, I'm going to start off today. Caroline, what drew you toward trying the carnivore diet and extended fasting, and what was happening in your body or life at that time that made you start experimenting?
Okay, so I had just ended a 4-year relationship, which unfortunately I ended up weighing nearly 100 kilos. And for someone who's not even 5 foot, that's a lot. And the reason I got to be that weight was because I wasn't having nearly as enough sex as my body craved. But this was all still prior to the being diagnosed with the lipedema. So I was 49 and I was miserable. I was overweight. I was uncomfortable and, extremely overweight for someone my height. And I remember one evening I had probably a bit too much to drink and nearly died in my sleep because I vomited, and I was lucky I woke myself up, and that was a wake up call for me. And at the time, a friend of mine, she was posting, bodybuilding bikini, competition photos. And so I met with her around Easter of 22. And I said, Mel, please tell me what if, how? And it was so funny because as a child, and I'm 53 now, but as a child, I remember them telecasting bodybuilding competitions, and I used to be mesmerized. And Mum used to say to me, "You're not doing that," because I was convinced I wanted to be a bodybuilder at a very, very young age. And this was probably before puberty and before lipedema set in. And she said, "I'll introduce you to my trainer." And from April of 22, I started educating myself about the carnivore diet. And my trainer said to me, fasting is not an obligation, it's an opportunity. And I tend to do things, like in the extreme. So I was doing consistent, continuous, rolling, extended fasting. So, 5 days no food, 1 day eating window, and then another 5 days water fasting with, electrolytes or salt. And then in 2 months, and this was with no exercise. So I hadn't started the training part of my journey at that stage, because when you're doing that type of extended fasting, your body doesn't have the energy to then expend at a gym lifting weights or, doing cardio. So if anything, it was light walking, but nothing too strenuous, because the fasting is enough. And I've since discovered that it has a huge benefit for people with serious comorbidities, because the autophagy and the cell regeneration is remarkable. Like water fasting, and I was even doing dry fasting, So dry fasting
That
is
sounds
quite
scary,
extreme.
Caroline.
Yeah, I got to probably day 3 of dry fasting and I started seeing stars. So I knew I had to stop. And just recently, I started to, because I was obviously dehydrated, I could tell my voice and my vocal cords were drying up. So I had to stop. But I wouldn't recommend it without proper advice, because I made the mistake of, after coming off of one of my, 5-day fasting, I straight away went to a high fat, high protein meal. And I was in the bathroom for the rest of the afternoon. So you've
Went
got to,
straight through you.
you've got to refeed gently. And there are, different people online that can, help with that. But I haven't actually found someone in person that I can go to, or someone I can recommend. But I just recently came across a YouTuber and I sort of followed his protocol coming back into refeeding. And even though what he recommends is not strictly carnivore, it made sense to not go straight into eggs and, milk. Or so he suggested coconut water to hydrate, rehydrate, and fruit juices, etc. And then, maybe day 2, an avocado. Anyway, if people are interested, there are resources out there.
For sure. Sorry, Caroline, I just want to interrupt you because you made some really great points. One of them was autophagy. And I just wanted to let our listeners know that autophagy is the clearing of junk proteins or incomplete proteins in your body. Your body does this naturally, but ketosis and fasting tend to make that more drastic. The autophagy sort of ramp up when you're in those states. And there was something else. Dry fasting is, and very good that you said that it shouldn't be done without supervision. Dry fasting is not only without food, but also without water. And so you have electrolytes, but you don't have any water. And so definitely do not do this without getting full support from somebody who's very knowledgeable about dry fasting.
No water.
No
No water is to touch your body. If you do it the right
I didn't
way,
know that, Caroline.
dry fasting is extreme. And it's what a lot of bodybuilders do towards the end when they're heading into
for a competition,
to look shredded.
Wow.
Yeah.
No wonder they feel terrible on the competition day.
Yeah, that's right. And what was I going to say? Yeah, autophagy, like you explained, it just accelerates the cell rejuvenation process. And, in the first 2 months that I was carnivore, I went from a size 20 to a size 10. And people did not recognize me.
I bet they didn't. That's huge.
And I was aging in reverse. And then I started the weight training, and I was loving it because it was 2 times a week for 30 minutes. And that was it. In and out. Obviously my trainer, he would decide which muscle groups to, exercise on particular days. And I just, in 6 months, I started at about 88 kilos and I got down to 67 kilos.
Can I just interrupt here, Caroline? So this was all before you were diagnosed with lipedema.
Exactly.
Correct? Okay.
Exactly.
So can you shed some light on, now that you know about lipedema, what changes did you see in your body being keto, fasting, and with that specialized strength training?
Well, I had never seen such dramatic results in terms of my fat to lean muscle composition, because that was the other thing I did. I had regular DEXA scans, because DEXA are the gold standard in assessing a person's not only bone density, because that's what I think DEXA's generally were designed for. It gives you a breakdown of lean muscle versus fat and other, minerals, water content, bones, the weight. For example, when I started out, I was probably 55% body fat. and I think 44% lead muscle. And it's never going to be muscle and fat 100 because there's all those other bits and pieces that make up your body. When I had dropped over 20 kilos, I didn't have a DEXA scan at that stage, but I'd set a goal with my trainer that I was going to attempt to get down to 62 by Christmas that year. And then by February the following year, I was going to aim to be down at 53 kilos. Now, that potentially is a little low for me. However, it's like when you're doing bodybuilding, you get to a competition weight and then you adjust from there because you can never stay at that competition weight.
No, there needs to be some maintenance there.
That's right. And so what happened for me, and this was a psychological thing, even though my trainer and I had agreed that 62 seemed reasonable considering I'd gone from 88 to 67 in 6 months. My ego was like, fuck you, I'm not doing that. And instead of going down, my weight kept creeping up. So by February of 23, when I turned 50, I was 73 kilos. And of course that was concerning, but I had a 6-week holiday plan for South America. So my trainer was like, just go, have fun, indulge. And I came back, and although I hadn't been training or strict carnivore, I was still 73 kilos. However, as my trainer said, you've turned to marshmallow again. So let's get you back into the gym. So I was training, but instead of going down, I kept creeping up. And he said, go and get your next DEXA done. And when I went, I was 35% body fat and nearly 70. So 35 body fat and I think 61 lean muscle. So I'd improved the fat by about 20% because remember I was 55, and the lean muscle put on roughly 20% lean muscle. So he said, look,
that's amazing.
Yeah.
Now, what I find interesting is because I had a DEXA scan just recently, and it actually showed up lipedema tissue.
Wow. That's
and
amazing.
nodule.
Because of that 35%, you've got to remember some of that is lipedema fat.
Yeah.
So if I were to remove, say, even 10% and come down to a healthy body fat percentage of 25, it would mean that my lean muscle would go up, because when they're removing the lipedema fat through the medical liposuction, that weighs something. So,
the percentages would all change.
And I was convinced that the DEXA scan can't read through lipedema fat.
It can.
But yeah, that's really great. I'm glad because, as I said, that Seeker scan can't, and the in-body scans are inaccurate. And like I beg women to not rely on in-body scans, personal trainers who have zero idea about, lipedema, and also dietitians and nutritionists who also are clueless. Because moderation, when I hear people say you have to eat in moderation, like seriously, go get fucked, because it doesn't work for us. And I'm not saying carnivore works for everybody. And I'm not telling people be as extreme as I was, but I tend to do things, I don't do things in halves. I love experimenting with my body. And so for me, I grab carnivore by the horns, and when I feel my best is when I go lion diet. And I know a lot of people go,
Can you explain that a little bit?
So lion diet is just meat, like high fat meat, salt and water. That's it.
Wow.
That's all. Because I I was lucky enough that dairy doesn't impact me like some other carnivores. So when I started my carnivore journey, I was incorporating cream, butter, I was having eggs, cheese, and you'll know, your body will tell you if you're having too much fat, because you'll just be running to the bathroom, you'll have diarrhea because your gallbladder cannot digest that much fat. And so, some people have intolerances to dairy, and eggs might not work for them. And I go through phases where, like, I can't stand the taste of meat. So I'll use, other animal-based products, bacon. And because I have high histamines, it means that I can't have food heated up. Like, I've pretty much got to cook from, sometimes even frozen meat, out of the freezer, in the air fryer, and it doesn't get a chance to build up histamines.
Wow, yeah.
And minced meat, because it's got a big surface area, that also, I don't have a lot of minced meat. And so, yeah, lion diet is when I've felt the best in terms of all symptoms and all of my comorbidities. Fasting and lion, are the way to go. And I eat, because I'm a low tolerance. No, let me just think. I'm not celiac, but I have
Intolerance.
intolerance to gluten. And if I'm eating cleanly, and in the past I'll have a little small bowl of pasta, I go into a carb coma. Like, I need to sleep. So even though I'm not celiac, I avoid carbs.
Yeah.
And I say to women who've got lipedema, give it a go. You've got nothing to lose. And like last year, I started hearing a lot about, Mediterranean diet. And so, because my background is Italian, so my parents and grandparents were born in Italy, I was born here. I tend to choose non-animal based products that are native to where my parents come from. So watermelon, eggplant, zucchini, broad beans. Yeah, ingredients that, if you lived in the Mediterranean, would be ample and abundant, So I do occasionally incorporate, some zucchini into my diet, or fruits, pomegranates. Yeah.
So you mostly stick to carnivore, but your flexibility entails still whole foods, mostly Mediterranean type foods.
And grass-fed and grass-finished, only because of my intolerance to gluten. So if meat is fed with grains, my body knows. And although grain-fed, Wagyu beef and, grain-fed Scotch is much more tasty, in my opinion.
Is it?
Yeah. I prefer to stick to grass-fed, grass-finished, and I tend to buy local. We've got a lot of Adelaide Hills suppliers. We've got the best olive oil, eggs, honey. I mean, honey, they say strictly it's not a carnivore.
Even though it's an animal product. That's
I
so,
know,
yeah.
I know, but it's not strictly considered an animal-based product.
Yeah.
I hear people say, "Oh no, honey's bee vomit," whatever. But because the
Delicious big vomit, right?
the bees
Even out of vomit.
the Ligurian honey are bees that are prolific on Kangaroo Island. I get my honey from there, and obviously Ligurian bees were originally from Italy. We'll, rather than use, say, sugar in a tea, do half a teaspoon of honey if it's a bitter type tea. Yeah. And, I think touching on what you were saying, Tiana, in the last interview about women seeking professional advice in terms of medication and medication can lower libido. It's also important to get your hormones checked, like to know what's going on with your hormones. And the funny thing is, now that I think back, when I started my carnivore journey and discovered I had lipedema, it was all around the time that you could say I'm perimenopausal.
Yeah.
And fortunately for me, or unfortunately for others, this year my periods come back, and it actually was really regular when I first started carnivore. I've never had a heavy period or an uncomfortable period. I'm one of the lucky ones. I'd say I don't suffer from PMS. However, my periods come back on track again this year after maybe 8 months of no period. That doesn't mean that, like I'm 35 again. Carnivore, fasting, doing the lymphatic drainage massage, the cold lasers, wearing compression garments, all of these things have kept me, I think, looking and feeling like I'm 35. And I want to live to 100 plus with quality of life. So, it's crucial to get good advice, seek, professionals that understand.
All right, Caroline. So
Okay.
for our last question, for someone with lipedema who's curious about carnivore, what do you think is important to understand before they start exploring it?
Get good advice, seek, professionals online who understand lipedema, and there aren't many of them around. I mean, I'm happy for people to contact me and, run through with me what their concerns are before embarking on a carnivore journey. I've done a lot of research and I've been part of different communities. However, I don't feel they necessarily address women with lipedema and comorbidities. So there seems to be a bit of a cookie cutter approach, which doesn't work. Like, you really need to treat yourself like a guinea pig and experiment and trial and error and get a DEXA scan. Like, get yourself a baseline so that, over time you can see the improvement. And I took like bikini photos from day dot. And those were really helpful for me to, like, when I started, going down that rabbit hole and talking to plastic surgeons and cosmetic surgeons, and I'd send them photos. One said that if he had been sent the photos of me at 67 kilos, he would not have diagnosed me with lipedema. And this was obviously
pretty telling.
Yeah, this was prior to me knowing that I had lipedema, and yet by the time I got round to seeing him, my body was back up to nearly 80 odd kilos.
Yeah, but you had been doing the carnivore and the strength training, and that's quite, in the sphere of diets, carnivore would be on the extreme end. And as you were saying, Caroline, you do things in the extreme. So it was natural for you to go to not only the carnivore diet, but the compliance of the carnivore diet to the extreme and all of the things associated with that. But it's very telling that that effort that was put in by you had some pretty remarkable results in your presentation of lipedema for a specialist to not be able to confidently diagnose you with lipedema. So I guess if people are of that persuasion to be able to stick to something as strict as carnivore, it's when you've got an inflammatory condition like lipedema and when you have other comorbidities that are inflammatory, it is a very therapeutic type diet.
Yeah.
Yes.
But it's for therapeutic reasons.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. If you're thinking that you're going to look cut and, that's definitely not going to happen, because when I was 67 kilos, I didn't think I could be any smaller, and seeing my body, my arms were still huge, and the fat that was around my knees and to my inner thighs was not acceptable, and you could see in my torso the lipedema fat. And for someone, like, it was disappointing to see myself in that same bikini at 88 kilos, and then me comparing and I was like, wow, 20 kilos down, and I'm still not, I don't look like I think I should look. And this
of course.
was prior to being diagnosed with lipedema, and then it all made sense. And then I in hindsight, I wish I'd been diagnosed at 67 kilos so that I could have rushed off to get liposuction, because then it would have been like a bit of a present to myself to get to shape that benefited, like that was a reward for all the hard work I'd put in.
Yeah, that's
for
fair.
sure.
But even at your increased weight after that 67, and you increased your weight, but you maintained the carnivore diet, even though the scales said you were bigger, you, from what I can understand from our conversation, is you looked better, because the specialist was like, I wouldn't diagnose you with lipedema. So, like, the scales is not the thing.
No.
The scales isn't the answer.
They don't tell enough of a story.
It's the DEXA. It's the DEXA.
Yeah.
Because my body composition, like the end of December, in fact, on the 31st of December, I went in for another DEXA, and I'm still 34, body fat, and 64 lean muscle. So, and I've had a bit of a journey the last 2 years, because, that's a story for another day.
Oh, well, we'll have to get you on
Another
for a
episode.
third
Look at that.
Yeah.
Well, Caroline, thank you so much for joining us for 2 episodes.
My pleasure.
And we appreciate you, and we wish you all the best, and maybe we'll get you on for a third one day.
Perhaps, yes. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you,
Have a
Caroline.
great day.
Bye. Lipedema and its symptoms vary from individual to individual. The opinions and advice voiced in this podcast are of a personal nature and used for educational purposes.
Please take away from this podcast what resonates with you, and please see your GP or preferred specialist for diagnosis and healthcare. We are Shell and Tiana from the Lipoedema Podcast. Until our next episode, bye for now.